"Mom, you don't need to be in there." Those were the words my son said to me on the morning of my husband's will reading. Not hello. Not are you holding up. Not even a simple good morning. Just those 7 words, spoken quietly in the hallway of a law office while I stood there wearing the navy blue jacket Robert had always liked. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood him. Grief has a way of making ordinary conversations feel distant, like you're listening through a closed door. I looked at Daniel and waited for him to smile and tell me he was joking. He didn't. Behind him stood my daughter Emily with her arms folded tightly across her chest. Next to her was Daniel's wife Vanessa, scrolling through her phone as if none of this concerned her. The receptionist sat silently behind her desk, pretending not to notice what was happening. "What do you mean?" I asked. My voice sounded calm even to me. Daniel glanced toward the conference room door. "This meeting is only for beneficiaries." I stared at him. The words landed softly, but the meaning behind them felt heavy. My husband had been gone for only 12 days. 12 days since I had stood beside his grave holding a single white rose. 12 days since I had returned to the house we shared for 46 years and found his reading glasses still resting beside his favorite chair. 12 days since I became a widow. And now my own children were standing in front of me as though I were a stranger. "Your father's will concerns the family," I said carefully. Emily finally spoke. "That's exactly why we think this is best." Best. Funny how people use that word when they're trying to justify something cruel. Vanessa looked up from her phone and offered a sympathetic smile that never reached her eyes. "We don't want you getting overwhelmed today, Margaret." Margaret. Not Mom. Not even Margaret with warmth. Just my name spoken like a formality. I nodded slowly. "I see." The truth was I didn't see at all. Robert and I had built our entire life together. We bought our first house when mortgage rates were high and money was tight. We worked extra shifts. We skipped vacations. We saved every dollar we could. Every account, every investment, every piece of property represented decades of shared effort. Yet somehow I was being treated like a visitor. Daniel reached for the conference room door. "We'll talk afterward." I looked past him. Through the narrow glass panel, I could see several chairs arranged around a polished oak table. Then I noticed something strange. One chair sat slightly apart from the others. A small name card had been removed from its place, leaving behind a pale rectangle on the wood. My eyes lingered there for only a second before Daniel shifted, blocking my view. "We'll handle everything," he said. I almost laughed. Handle everything. As though I hadn't spent most of my life handling everything. I thought about arguing. I thought about demanding an explanation. But Robert always used to tell me something during difficult moments. Never react while everyone else is emotional. Wait. Watch. Listen. So that's exactly what I did. I nodded once, turned around and walked toward the elevator. No tears. No raised voice. No scene. Just quiet footsteps across the marble floor. Behind me, I heard the conference room door close. The sound echoed through the hallway. Outside, the November air felt colder than I expected. I sat on a bench across the street and watched people hurry past carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Life continued moving forward as if nothing had changed. As if my entire world hadn't shifted beneath my feet. I reached into my purse and pulled out the photograph I carried everywhere now. Robert stood beside me on a lakeside dock, smiling at something outside the frame. The picture had been taken 3 summers earlier. Looking at it still hurt. But something else bothered me more. Robert was many things. Careful. Thoughtful. Protective. The kind of man who planned Christmas gifts months in advance and kept copies of important documents in perfectly labeled folders. He would never leave confusion behind. He would never leave me vulnerable. As I stared at his photograph, a memory surfaced. 3 days before he died, Robert had received a phone call. Afterward, he asked me to step outside while he spoke privately with someone. That had never seemed important before. Now it did. I slipped the photograph back into my purse. Across the street, the conference room blinds shifted slightly. For a brief second, I saw movement inside. Then I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. Someone in that room wasn't celebrating. Someone looked worried. Very worried. And for the first time since Daniel stopped me in that hallway, I began to wonder if being excluded from that meeting wasn't the whole story. I drove home slowly that afternoon, taking the long route without really meaning to. The roads were familiar, lined with maple trees that had already surrendered most of their leaves to the approaching winter. Robert always loved this time of year. He used to say there was something honest about autumn. No pretending. No hiding. Everything showed exactly what it was. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sun was already beginning to sink behind the neighboring houses. The home looked exactly the same as it had the day before, yet it felt different now. Quieter. Colder. As though it knew something I did not. I sat in the car for several minutes before going inside. The garage door opened with its usual rumble. The kitchen light glowed softly through the doorway. Everything remained where Robert had left it. His coffee mug sat beside the sink. His favorite weathered baseball cap still hung from the hook near the laundry room. Even the small notepad he kept for grocery lists remained on the counter with his handwriting on the top page. Milk. Bread. Batteries. Ordinary words that suddenly felt precious. I set my purse down and walked through the house room by room. In the living room, his reading chair faced the fireplace. A folded blanket rested over one arm exactly as it always had. I reached down and touched the fabric. For a moment I could almost imagine him sitting there, asking me what I wanted for dinner. Instead there was only silence. The kind of silence that settles deep into a house after a loss. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table. That was when I noticed something else. Daniel had not called. Neither had Emily. Not after the will reading. Not after asking me to leave. Hours had passed without a single message. I stared at my phone. Nothing. The realization hurt more than I wanted to admit. When Robert was alive, our children called often enough. Birthday dinners. Holiday plans. Questions about recipes. Requests for advice. Small things. Normal things. But over the past few years something had shifted. Gradually. Quietly. The calls became less frequent. The visits shorter. Conversations felt rushed. At the time I blamed busy schedules. Careers. Children. Adult responsibilities. Now I wondered if I had simply ignored what was right in front of me. Around 7 o'clock, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I looked through the window and saw Daniel's SUV. My stomach tightened. For a brief moment I thought he might have come to apologize. Instead he entered carrying a folder under one arm and barely looked at me. "I just need a few things from Dad's office," he said. Dad's office. Not Mom, are you okay? Not Mom, can we talk? Just business. I nodded. Of course. He disappeared down the hallway. I remained seated at the table, listening to drawers open and close. File cabinets slide. Papers shuffle. 20 minutes later he emerged carrying a cardboard box filled with documents. "What are those?" I asked. "Just financial records," he replied quickly. "Things we need to organize." "We." That word caught my attention. Not I. Not the attorney. We. As though decisions were already being made somewhere without me. Daniel moved toward the front door. Then he hesitated. For the first time all day he looked uncomfortable. "Mom, try not to worry about everything." I almost smiled at that. Try not to worry. The same people who excluded me from my husband's will reading were now asking me not to worry. "I will do my best," I said. He nodded and left. After his taillights disappeared down the street, I walked slowly to Robert's office. Several drawers stood partially open. One folder was missing from the shelf beside his desk. I could see the empty space where it had been. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. Just a small absence. Yet something about it unsettled me. I sat down in Robert's chair and looked around the room. The desk lamp cast a warm circle of light across the polished wood surface. That was when my eyes landed on a framed photograph tucked beside the computer monitor. It showed Robert and me standing beside a lake during our 40th anniversary trip. Picked it up carefully. Behind the frame, folded neatly against the backing, was a small yellow note in Robert's handwriting. My pulse quickened. There were only 6 words written across the paper. "If anything feels wrong, wait. Then look deeper." I read the sentence 3 times. The room suddenly felt very still. And for the first time since Robert died, I began to suspect he had known something was coming. I sat alone in our bedroom long after midnight, holding one of Noel's old letters in my hands. The paper had yellowed around the edges, softened by time and years of being folded and unfolded. Outside, the wind brushed against the maple tree near the window, creating a familiar scratching sound that had lulled us to sleep for decades. Back then, Noel would always joke that the tree was trying to remind us it was still standing guard over the house. I could almost hear his voice as I traced the careful handwriting across the page. Noel had never been a man of grand speeches. He showed love through quiet actions. Every winter morning he started my car before I left for work, so I would not have to sit in the cold. Every summer evening, he watered my roses even after long days at the office. He remembered every anniversary, every birthday, every small detail that mattered to me. One memory returned with painful clarity. It was nearly 10 years earlier, sitting together on the back porch as the sun disappeared beyond the fence line. We were both retired by then. Noel had reached for my hand and squeezed it gently. "Promise me something," he had said. "If anything ever happens to me, do not let anyone make you feel small in your own home." I remembered laughing and telling him he was being dramatic. He had smiled but shook his head. "I mean it, Myrtle. This house belongs to our life together. Everything we built was for both of us." At the time, I had brushed the conversation aside. Noel was healthy, strong, reliable, the kind of man who seemed permanent. Now his absence echoed through every room. My eyes drifted toward the nightstand where his reading glasses still rested exactly where he had left them. I had not moved them. Somehow moving them felt too much like admitting he was never coming back. Another memory surfaced. A rainy afternoon about 3 years before his death. Wade and Romy had come over for dinner. During the meal, Romy had made several comments about property values in the neighborhood. At the time, I thought she was simply making conversation. But looking back now, I remembered the way Noel's expression had changed. Later that evening, after they left, he stood at the kitchen sink staring out the window. "Do not trust everything that sounds like concern," he told me quietly. "Some people only see dollar signs when they look at a family home." I had asked whether he was talking about Romy. He never answered directly. Instead, he changed the subject and kissed my forehead. That had been Noel's way. He preferred peace over confrontation. Yet now, sitting alone in the silence, those forgotten moments felt different. Like pieces of a puzzle I had never bothered to assemble. The letter trembled slightly in my hands. In it, Noel described a weekend trip we had taken shortly after our 20th anniversary. We had rented a small cabin near a lake and spent 2 days fishing, cooking together, and talking about the future. Near the bottom of the page, he had written a sentence that brought tears to my eyes. "No matter what happens, remember that everything I have is yours because every good thing in my life began with you." I closed my eyes and pressed the letter against my chest. For 32 years, Noel had protected me from every storm he could. He had believed our son would continue that protection after he was gone. Neither of us could have imagined what would happen just 1 week after his funeral. Downstairs, I heard a floorboard creak. The sound startled me until I remembered I was alone. Wade and Romy had already gone home for the evening after delivering their ultimatum. The house felt enormous now. Empty. Yet strangely, Noel's words gave me a small measure of comfort. They reminded me that my memories were real. My marriage was real. The life we built together could not be erased simply because someone else wanted ownership of the walls surrounding it. I carefully folded the letter and placed it back inside its envelope. Then I opened the drawer beside the bed. Inside were dozens more letters, anniversary cards, photographs, and documents Noel had organized over the years. He had always been meticulous. Every paper had its place. Every important record was filed and labeled. For the first time since the funeral, a thought crossed my mind. Noel had planned everything. He never left important matters unfinished. As I stared at those neatly organized folders, I found myself wondering whether there were things I still did not know. Things Noel might have prepared long before his death. The grief remained. The loneliness remained. But beneath them, something else began to stir. A quiet feeling I had not experienced since that terrible dinner. Not hope exactly. Not yet. Just the faint realization that perhaps Noel had left behind more than memories. Perhaps he had left behind a way for me to protect myself, even after he was gone. The next morning I woke before sunrise. For a few seconds I forgot everything. Then reality returned. Noel was gone. My son wanted my house. Romy wanted my life packed into boxes within 2 weeks. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the furnace. The silence felt different now. Less like grief. More like anticipation. The folders in Noel's nightstand drawer stayed on my mind. After making a cup of coffee, I carried it back upstairs and sat beside the bed. The first folder contained insurance papers. The second held tax records. The third contained home improvement receipts dating back nearly 20 years. Typical Noel. Organized. Careful. Prepared. I continued sorting through the stack until I found a large envelope labeled simply, "Personal." My fingers hesitated before opening it. Inside were several documents and a handwritten note. The sight of Noel's handwriting instantly tightened my throat. I unfolded the paper carefully. "Myrtle, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer there to explain things myself." That first sentence alone brought tears to my eyes. I sat quietly and continued reading. Noel explained that he had spent years organizing our finances to ensure I would never struggle. He wrote about wanting me to feel secure regardless of what happened after his death. Then one paragraph caught my attention immediately. It mentioned our attorney Harold Benson. Beneath the paragraph was a phone number written in blue ink. Harold Benson had handled our legal affairs for nearly 15 years. I had not spoken to him since the funeral. My eyes moved to the remaining papers inside the envelope. Most appeared to be copies of legal documents. I recognized signatures, property records, trust paperwork. Several pages referenced the house. Suddenly the doorbell rang downstairs. The sound startled me so badly I nearly dropped the papers. I checked the clock. It was only 9:15 in the morning. Few people visited unexpectedly anymore. I carefully returned everything to the envelope and went downstairs. Through the front window, I recognized the visitor immediately. It was Evelyn Carter. Evelyn had lived 3 houses down for almost 25 years. She and Noel often exchanged gardening advice over the backyard fence. Opening the door, I forced a small smile. "Evelyn." What a surprise. Her expression softened the moment she saw me. "I hope I am not interrupting anything." "Not at all." I invited her inside. We sat together in the kitchen where countless neighbors had shared coffee over the decades. Evelyn wrapped both hands around her mug before speaking. "Myrtle, I have been trying to decide whether I should tell you this." A familiar knot formed in my stomach. "Tell me what?" She looked uncomfortable. "The week before Noel passed away, I overheard something." I remained silent. Evelyn rarely involved herself in gossip. If she had come here, the matter was serious. I was outside watering my flowers. Wade and Romy were standing near their car in your driveway. They did not realize I was nearby. She paused carefully. "I heard Romy talking about this house." My grip tightened around my coffee cup. "What did she say?" Evelyn looked directly into my eyes. "She said once Noel was gone, everything would finally fall into place." The kitchen suddenly felt colder. "Are you sure?" I asked quietly. "Very sure." Evelyn nodded. Then she started discussing renovation plans, room expansions, new flooring, even knocking down a wall between the kitchen and dining room. My heart sank. Noel had not even died yet, and they were already discussing changes to the home, changes that assumed ownership. Evelyn continued gently. "At the time, I thought maybe Noel had told them something about future plans. But after hearing what happened at dinner..." She stopped. "Myrtle, I do not think their conversation was innocent." I stared at the table. Every strange look, every whispered conversation, every sudden decision over the past several months seemed to take on new meaning. They had not acted impulsively after the funeral. This had been building long before Noel died. Evelyn reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You are not alone in this." Those simple words nearly broke me. Not because they were dramatic, but because they were sincere. For days I had felt discarded, replaced, forgotten. Yet here sat a friend who expected nothing from me. Someone who simply cared. After she left, I stood alone in the kitchen for a long time. Then I looked toward the staircase leading upstairs. The envelope from Noel remained exactly where I had left it. Slowly I climbed the steps. For the first time since that terrible dinner, I no longer felt completely powerless. Pieces of the truth were beginning to emerge. And somewhere inside those papers, I suspected Noelle had left behind far more than memories. That afternoon I finally called Harold Benson. My hand lingered over the telephone for several seconds before I dialed the number Noelle had written in blue ink. Part of me feared what I might learn. Another part feared learning nothing at all. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Harold Benson speaking. Harold, this is Myrtle Hayes. There was a brief pause. Then warmth entered his voice immediately. Myrtle, I have been meaning to call you. How are you holding up? The question nearly brought tears to my eyes. Not because of the words themselves, but because he sounded genuinely concerned. I have had better weeks, I admitted quietly. Harold sighed softly. I imagine you have. We exchanged a few polite words about the funeral before I mentioned Noelle's letter. The tone of the conversation changed instantly. I see, Harold said. Then Noelle wanted you to contact me personally. I sat straighter in my chair. What exactly did he leave for me, Harold? Silence lingered for a moment. Then he answered carefully. Myrtle, there are several things we should discuss in person. Some of them involve documents Noelle specifically instructed me to review with you after his passing. My pulse quickened. Documents concerning the house? Among other matters, he replied. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? After ending the call, I sat quietly at the kitchen table. The conversation had not provided answers. Yet somehow it had given me something better. Confirmation. Noelle had anticipated things. He had prepared things. And most importantly, he had trusted someone to help me understand them. Around 6 o'clock that evening my phone rang again. This time it was Wade. His name appeared on the screen, and for several seconds I simply stared at it. Eventually I answered. Hello, Wade. Mom. His voice sounded unusually cheerful, forced, careful. I wanted to check in. The concern felt strange after everything that had happened. That is kind of you. Have you made any progress with your moving plans? There it was. Not concern. Not grief. Not a conversation about how I was coping after losing my husband. Straight to the house. Straight to the deadline. I looked out the kitchen window toward the backyard Noelle had loved. I am considering my options. That is good, Wade replied quickly. Romy found a really nice senior community about 15 miles from here. They have activities and transportation and all kinds of programs. Every word sounded rehearsed. I imagined Romy sitting beside him, coaching the conversation. That was thoughtful of her, I said calmly. We just want what is best for you, Mom. I closed my eyes briefly. The sentence would have sounded convincing if not for everything else. The ultimatum. The indifference. The plans Evelyn had overheard before Noelle even died. I appreciate your concern, I answered. I will let you know when I make a decision. Wade hesitated. Well, the sooner the better. There are a lot of things we need to start planning. We. Not me. Not our family. We. Him and Romy. Planning a future inside my home. After we ended the call, I placed the phone face down on the table and sat quietly for a long time. Oddly enough, I did not feel angry anymore. Anger required surprise. And surprise was fading with every new piece of information. Instead, I felt clarity. The fog that had surrounded me since Noelle's funeral was beginning to lift. Later that evening, I returned upstairs and opened Noelle's envelope again. This time I examined every page carefully. Several legal documents referenced ownership structures I did not fully understand. Others mentioned trusts and beneficiary protections. Certain sections contained handwritten notes Noelle had added himself. One note caught my attention immediately. Beside a paragraph describing property rights, he had written 4 simple words. Read this carefully, Myrtle. I smiled despite myself. Even now, he sounded exactly like the man I had shared 32 years with. Methodical. Protective. Patient. As darkness settled outside, I carefully returned the documents to the envelope. Tomorrow I would meet Harold. Tomorrow I would finally learn what Noelle had spent years preparing. And for the first time since that terrible dinner, I realized something important. Wade and Romy believed they were waiting for me to surrender. What they did not know was that I had already stopped playing the role they expected. Quietly, without telling anyone, I was beginning to ask questions. And sometimes questions were far more dangerous than arguments. The following morning, I drove to Harold Benson's office under a gray sky that threatened rain. The building was familiar. Noel and I had visited many times over the years for routine paperwork, estate planning, and the countless practical matters that come with building a life together. Walking through those doors without him felt strange. Harold greeted me personally and led me into a quiet conference room. A thick folder sat waiting on the polished wooden table. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Harold folded his hands and looked directly at me. "Myrtle, before we begin, there is something you need to understand. Noel was deeply concerned about your future. Not because he doubted your strength, but because he understood people." I felt my chest tighten. Harold opened the folder and carefully arranged several documents in front of me. Over the last 5 years, Noel updated his estate plans multiple times. Each revision had one purpose: to ensure that you would remain financially secure and legally protected. I stared at the papers. Legal language filled every page. Yet one phrase appeared repeatedly: lifetime occupancy rights. Harold pointed to a section and explained it patiently. The house could not be sold, transferred, or claimed by anyone while I was alive and chose to live there. Not Wade. Not Romy. Not anyone. The words settled over me slowly. "You mean they cannot force me out?" Harold shook his head. "Absolutely not." A strange silence filled the room. For days I had carried the weight of their deadline. 2 weeks. Pack your things. Leave your home. Yet according to these documents, the threat had never possessed any legal power at all. Harold continued. "There is more." He slid another document across the table. This one established a trust that Noel had quietly funded for years. The amount was larger than I expected. Much larger. My hands trembled slightly as Harold explained the details. Monthly income, emergency reserves, property maintenance funds. Everything had been arranged long before Noel's death. Tears filled my eyes, not because of the money, but because I could see Noel's fingerprints all over every decision. Even while facing his own mortality, he had been protecting me. Harold handed me a tissue and waited. "There is one final item," he said gently. From the folder, he removed a sealed envelope. Across the front, written in Noel's careful handwriting, were 4 simple words. "For Myrtle. Open personally." My vision blurred immediately. Harold quietly excused himself and left the room. Alone, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. Not a legal instruction. Not financial guidance. Just a letter from my husband. I read every word slowly. Noel wrote about our first apartment, our first car, the day Wade was born, and the countless ordinary moments that had made up our marriage. Then near the end, his tone changed. "If circumstances after my passing ever make you doubt yourself, remember this. You are stronger than you think. Do not surrender your dignity to people who mistake kindness for weakness." I read the sentence 3 times. Each time it struck deeper. For the first time since his funeral, I felt something inside me begin to straighten. Not anger. Not revenge. Something steadier. Self-respect. When I finally left Harold's office, rain had started falling softly across the parking lot. I sat behind the wheel of my car for several minutes, looking at the envelope resting on the passenger seat. Wade and Romy believed I was frightened. They believed I was alone. They believed time was working in their favor. But the truth was becoming clearer with every passing day. They had built their plans on assumptions. Noel had built his plans on preparation. And preparation, I was beginning to realize, was far stronger than greed. When I returned home, I did not rush to call anyone. I did not confront Wade. I did not send messages to Romy. Instead, I parked in the driveway and sat quietly for a few minutes, watching raindrops slide across the windshield. The house looked exactly the same as it had that morning. The white porch railing. The flower beds Noel had built by hand. The maple tree standing guard near the front yard. Yet everything felt different. For the first time since the funeral, I knew the truth. Not assumptions. Not fears. Facts. I carried Noel's letter inside and placed it carefully in the top drawer of my desk. Then I made myself a simple lunch and ate at the kitchen table. The calm surprised me. A week earlier, I would have spent the entire afternoon crying. Now my thoughts felt steady, focused. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Romy. Just checking in. Have you started sorting your belongings yet? We are trying to schedule contractors. I stared at the message for several seconds. Contractors. She was already planning renovations for a house she did not own. The confidence almost impressed me. Almost. I set the phone aside without replying. An hour later, another message arrived. This one from Wade. Mom, please do not make this harder than it needs to be. We are only thinking about your future. I read the words twice. Then I looked around the kitchen. My future. The same future they had apparently been discussing before Noelle even passed away. The same future that required me to leave my home so they could move in. I deleted neither message. Instead, I saved them. Something Harold had said earlier echoed in my mind. Documentation matters. That evening, I began paying attention in ways I never had before. I gathered paperwork, organized files, created folders. Not because I expected a fight, but because clarity deserved preparation. Noelle understood that. Now I was beginning to understand it too. The following afternoon, Wade and Romy arrived unexpectedly. Their car pulled into the driveway just after 3 o'clock. Through the front window, I watched them approach the house together. Romy carried a bright smile that never quite reached her eyes. Wade looked impatient. I opened the door before they knocked. Mom, Wade said, stepping inside. We were in the neighborhood. The lie was obvious. They lived nearly 30 minutes away. Still, I simply nodded. Romy glanced around the living room. Have you made progress? She asked. No greeting. No small talk. Straight to business. Progress on what? I asked calmly. Her smile tightened slightly. Packing. Looking at retirement communities. Making arrangements. I noticed Wade watching my face carefully, almost as if he expected me to break down. Instead, I walked toward the kitchen and offered coffee. Neither accepted. Actually, Wade said, we were hoping for an update. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. The little boy who used to ride his bicycle down this driveway. The teenager Noelle taught to change a tire. The young man whose college tuition we paid without hesitation. Somewhere along the way, something had changed. Or perhaps something had simply been revealed. I met with Harold Benson yesterday, I said. The effect was immediate. Romy's expression froze. Wade blinked. The attorney? He asked. Yes. Silence settled over the room. Small, brief, but noticeable. For the first time, uncertainty appeared in their eyes. I did not explain further. I did not mention the trust, the property protections, the documents. I simply let the silence sit between us. Eventually, Romy forced another smile. Well, that sounds productive. It was, I replied. And for the first time since Noelle's death, I realized something important. The balance in the room had shifted. Just slightly, but enough for them to feel it. Enough for them to understand that the frightened widow they expected was beginning to disappear. After Wade and Romy left, I stood at the front window and watched their car disappear down the street. Neither of them had stayed very long. Neither of them had pushed as hard as they usually did. The moment I mentioned Harold Benson, something had changed. It was subtle but unmistakable. For the first time, uncertainty had entered the conversation. I spent the rest of the evening quietly organizing paperwork at my dining room table. The stack of documents continued to grow. Property records, trust information, copies of messages, notes from conversations. I was not building a case against anyone. I was simply collecting the truth. And truth, I was learning, had a way of revealing itself when given enough time. The next morning, I received another call from Evelyn Carter. Her voice sounded hesitant. Myrtle, I hope you do not mind me saying this, but I saw Wade and Romy yesterday afternoon. I listened carefully. They stopped by the hardware store near the highway. I happened to be there buying flower fertilizer. She paused. I overheard part of a conversation. My stomach tightened slightly. What did you hear? They were talking about renovation budgets. Romy mentioned removing the dining room wall and expanding the kitchen. I closed my eyes briefly. They were still discussing renovations, still planning changes to a house they did not own. Evelyn continued. Then Wade said he hoped everything would be settled before the holidays. The words lingered in my mind long after the call ended. Before the holidays. As though my departure was already scheduled. As though my consent was merely a formality. Later that afternoon, I decided to visit the cemetery. It was my first trip there alone since the funeral. The sky was clear, and a cool breeze moved through the rows of trees surrounding the property. I carried a small bouquet of white flowers from the garden Noel loved. Standing beside his headstone, I felt the familiar ache return. Grief was strange. Some days it arrived like a storm. Other days it settled quietly beside you and refused to leave. I knelt carefully and placed the flowers near the base of the stone. "You knew, did you not?" I whispered. "Not everything, but enough." The wind stirred softly around me. I thought about the trust, the legal protections, the letters, the conversations he had tried to have years earlier. Noel had seen warning signs long before I did. Not because he distrusted people by nature, because he paid attention. He noticed what others overlooked. I remained there for nearly an hour, talking to him as though he were sitting beside me. When I finally returned home, a certified envelope was waiting in my mailbox. My name was typed neatly across the front. The return address belonged to a real estate consulting company. Confused, I carried it inside and opened it at the kitchen table. Inside was a brochure describing home valuation services and property transition planning. Attached to it was a handwritten note. "Myrtle, we were informed that your property may soon be entering a transfer process. We would be happy to assist." My hands froze. Transfer process. Someone had contacted a real estate company. Someone had discussed my home as though ownership changes were already underway. I stared at the note for several long seconds. Then I turned the page over. Written in the corner was a contact reference name. Romy Lawson. A strange calm settled over me. Not shock. Not outrage. Just certainty. The assumptions were becoming larger. The plans were becoming bolder. And the mistakes were becoming easier to see. I carefully placed the brochure into my growing folder of documents. Then I looked around the kitchen. The same kitchen where Noel drank coffee every morning. The same kitchen where Wade once sat doing homework after school. The same kitchen Romy planned to redesign. Quietly, I smiled for the first time in days. Not because the situation was amusing, because every new step they took seemed to reveal more than they intended. And the more they revealed, the stronger my position became.